Let us see how we can make our Markdown documents in case you haven't done that before. So first, log into RStudio on Orion. Or you can actually do this on your own laptop as well, but now I do it on Orion. You have to install RStudio on your laptop then. This is RStudio work. So, how do we make our Markdown documents? Well, we typically make them by just saying File, New File, and then you choose R Markdown. There it is. Click on that. And then typically the first time you do this, I think, at least that happened to me when I logged in here, RStudio complained about the version of the Markdown package was too old, so I had to update it. But then you just click yes and update that. I did that and it worked fine. So it wanted a newer version. And it updated. Okay, the title, that's simply not the name of the file itself, but it's simply the title of your report. So I think that in my example here now, the assignment 1 is a very good title, right? And you should also type your name here, because that is the name that will show up in the report, so I can see who wrote the report. So your proper name, right? Not the username. The date, yeah, that's not so important. You can add it if you like. I skip it. Don't change anything here because we want the HTML version. You can also knit to PDF or Word documents. Please stay with the HTML. That's easy to read and looks pretty, and it's also, in my experience, the least sort of chance of something going wrong. There's always some hassle with these others. Like this. And then you notice, if you haven't done this before, this Markdown documents that you create in R, they are always filled with some example code. But first of all, notice now, here is now the title, and you can of course go in here and change it afterwards, in case you decide this was not a good title after all. But the rest is fine. So from here, no, sorry. This code here is just an example code that you typically just delete and replace with your own code. But instead of doing that now, let's just look at this example code. First of all, the sections and subsections and so on in your document starts with this hashtag. If you have a single hashtag, you have sort of the uppermost, this is the first section. And then two hashtags means a subsection, three hashtags a subsection, and so on, right? So I think we always start with a single hashtag. That's sort of the outer level. Yeah. And of course you choose your own titles and so on. I recommend you use exactly the same titles in your report as you saw in the assignment text itself. Right? So you simply just copy the structure of the report from that document, and then you replace the text with the sort of the assignment exercise text with your answer text, you could say, and code. Yeah, and code is the most important thing, because here you can see an example of what we call an R chunk in the code. So the code you type just as in any other document, and then it will show up in your report as simple text. But you also want to include some code, and then you put it in like this, R code like this. You can name your chunk. You don't have to do that. This is perfectly fine. And how do I create a new chunk? I put my cursor here and I go up here and select R, and then you can see the chunk is created and ready to start filling R code here. Okay, let me take it out again. Yeah, and this code can of course include some plotting commands and so on. Before I do anything else now. Let me just save this file and knit it. And of course, where you save it is important. So I would like to now have a new folder here for my assignment 1, right? It's a good idea to have some sort of system with folders. So assignment 1, and notice never ever ever a space inside folder names. If you want to have some sort of spacing, put an underscore. But in a Unix system, it's always a hassle if you try to make names with spaces inside. It's actually a hassle in all systems, I would say. Never do that. Never do that. Put underscores or some other character so that it's sort of one contiguous string. Otherwise it looks like it's two, right? It's two names if you have a space in there. And then I click myself into that here in RStudio, and then I typically also change the working directory so that, because notice up here in the console window, you see where you are where RStudio is working right now, where R is working, and this is my home folder, right? I don't want to work in my home. I want to be down in that assignment 1 folder. And then I go here, set as working directory. After I chose that folder here, you can see I've chosen it here. Set as working directory, and then you can see up here it changes as well. And I can even click on this arrow to verify that, because then you update. If I go up again here now and click on this arrow, I'm taken back to this folder. This is where I want to work. And this is also where I want to save my file now. Save as. And then now you must make sure this is the folder. And I have to say, this is a very common mistake to make for people who are a little bit new to this Unix system. You don't really remember where you saved your file. Please make sure, stay awake. Always see where you save your file. Because if you don't know where your files are, you are lost. Right? And I see this over and over and over again. So give this file a name, assignment 1. And again, never use spaces inside file names. The same as for folder names. Always one contiguous string. And you can add the extension .rmd, but if you don't, RStudio will do it for you, because it knows this should be a markdown document and they should always have this .rmd extension. So now we are ready to knit the document because it has some content, right? So let's do that. And that's the knit button up here. You just click on that, and the document is sort of compiled, as we say, or knitted. And it may take a little bit time, and this depends on how much code you have inside your document and stuff, how much time this take, and also a little bit on how slow this server is. But there something happened, and you may get a window that pops up and where you have a button saying try again. You just push the try again button and this should open. It doesn't always open on the first attempt. So this is simply now an HTML file with how the document will look like at the end, right? So this is sort of the source, right? And this is how it looks like after knitting. And now you can see that we get the title here, the author, the first headline, right? Our markdown, which is slightly bigger than the next headline because we have 2 hashtags here. Oops, what happened to my... There it is. So, and now you can see the first R chunk here. You can see the text, and that is displayed in the same way as you see over here. But the R chunk, this is now both displayed in this gray sort of box, and also it's executed, because you can see under here is the result of executing this command. And the same down here with a plot. But if you look at this, you can see the text here, but we don't see the actual code. What happened to the code here? And this is hidden because of this here. Echo equals false. That means you hide the code when you compile, but you still execute the code. So the result of it appears as a plot this time, because it's a plotting code, right? In your reports, you will typically do the opposite. Let me click away this window here now. And what do I mean by the opposite? Instead of hiding the code and showing its result, which is what you do here, you want to do the opposite. You want to show the code but not execute it. And then you replace echo with eval. Eval equals false. And why should you typically want to do this? Well, because the code you put in your chunks are typically something you have already in a script, either an R script or a shell script. And when you do the executions, you execute those scripts. Typically, that's perhaps not for assignment 1, but at least for the later assignment. This is very typical. And these scripts may take a long time to execute, and they involve the use of slurms, queuing on Orion, and so on. So you cannot run them in the Markdown document, because first of all, it's not going to run, and even if it could, it will take a long time, right, to compile each document. So instead, we say that, okay, you run the code in your scripts, but you include the code in your report without running it. And this is how you do that. So yeah, I take away that name. You don't need that name, but you need a comma here. You can name each chunk with the, as you saw, there was a name here, cars. That's just a label, you can say. You don't really have to do that. But put in this eval equals false. I would say by default, put it in all chunks. And then in those few chunks where you are actually producing a plot, for instance, then of course you have to turn the evaluation on again by setting eval equals true, so that the code is actually executed. But this should be a small code that execute only something needed to produce a figure, for instance. Okay, so putting the R chunks, in most cases R chunks are okay to evaluate, because they usually involve just some smallish computations, and in order to make a plot in this chunk, you may need to evaluate the previous chunk as well. So you may have to put eval equals true to R chunks in general. But you will also typically later, not in assignment 1, but in later assignments, you will also include shellcode. And how can you do that? Well, you choose a bash chunk here, and then I would say always eval equals false, because the shell code that we will put in here typically involve the use of the Slurm queuing system, and you cannot do that from R Markdown. And even if you could, it will take a long time, right? So that's a really, so you just include the shell code that you have you copy it from some script that you have and paste it in here, put eval equals false, and it will be displayed, but it will not be executed. Okay, let's show this eval equals false and so on. Comes some shell code, right, in here. And now I put this eval equals false. Let's knit the document again just to see what happens compared to the previous one where we had this plot here. And now we should have the opposite, right? Instead of getting the plot, we get the code for making the plot, but we don't actually make the plot. Yeah, it's a little bit slow again. There it was. And now you saw this try again. So here you can see now. Now you can see the code appeared, but it was not executed, evaluated, as we say. This up here is still evaluated though. How can you find more help about R Markdown? Because this is actually what you need, right? R chunks and bash chunks. You don't need anything else. You will need to include some image files and so on in later reports produced by other softwares. How can you learn more about R Markdown? Well, first of all, there is a quick reference here under the help menu, and that's really useful. Here you can see some very quick, how do you make bullet point lists and so on. And here, images from a local file. If you have a file with an image, for instance this one, right here, or yeah, typically like this then this is the pattern, right? Exclamation mark, some text that you want to have under the figure, and then a parenthesis with the path to where the figure file is located. Then you include the file. For instance, a PDF file can be included like this, or a JPEG image file. Yeah. There are also some other help stuff here, sort of cheat sheets. There is this cheat sheet you can look at. There it is, R Markdown cheat sheet. It's a PDF document or reference guide. This is the sort of really comprehensive help. Or you can just Google, of course. I do that myself. I would say though, don't spend too much or don't spend any time really on making fancy looking reports in this course. We prefer things simple and sort of minimalistic in a sense. But of course you may produce reports in R Markdown in other instances, and then this is more important, I think. But for this course, please try to make things clean and simple and sort of minimalistic. We prefer that because we have to read through many reports. Okay, I think that's it. And if you have some problems, just ask on the weekly hours.